Some roles have rules of thumb or mantras which underpin the whole activity. We wanted to know if there was such a rule of thumb for case managers. Is there any general rule of thumb which you'd recommend to a case manager?
Well, I guess the first thing is always about listening to your client, and yeah, everybody says that, but they are the most important person, and it's so easy to say. It's not always easy to put into practice that idea of listening, because you might think you know better than they. You might come up with different ideas from what they want. So there's always room for discussion and room for negotiation, and you might be able to suggest things that they hadn't thought of before. But at the end of the day, it's their life. And I just remember one client of mine who I ended up working with for a very long time. He was injured when he was quite small, but big enough to be able to walk and run, and he ran across the road and the car didn't see him, and he got tossed in the air and was really badly injured from that. So although he was very young, his whole life trajectory was changed in an instant. Now, it was a long time after that when I first got to know him. He'd had some therapy. He'd missed a lot of school because he'd needed all this therapy. And he really didn't like any of it. He didn't like the fact that he didn't like the way he was, because he was obviously different from the rest of the world in his eyes. He didn't like all the therapies that he'd had. So, where do you start? His first reaction to me was, as his mum put it, he's legged it. She said, when I turned up, I did a report, a court report, as an expert witness initially, and then I came back as case manager. So he knew he'd met me. He knew that we talked about the importance of therapy. He didn't like therapy. So, we were off to a really, really bad start. And so just minutes, I'd actually seen him as I drove up to the family house, and he was off in a hurry in the other direction. So, I needed to be able to demonstrate to him that I had suggestions to make, but actually what he wanted to say was also really important. We got there, and he made some good changes in his life, and he's now a grown man with a family, and he's very happy about that. And I'm just delighted to have been part of those changes for him. But it was hard work.
Yeah, there's a lot of patience required.
Yes, and persistence, and if I hadn't been able to demonstrate to him that what he wanted to say to me, I was going to listen to and take seriously, I don't think I would have got anywhere.
Do you find a lot of the clients you deal with are affected by the does he take sugar approach, in that you're at some stage the first person who's actually sitting down, even though family members might be really worried and caring about them, but you're the first person who actually sits down and starts talking to them like they would have been talked to before whatever event.
Yes, you've actually made me think of another person, much older guy, who I worked with for a while. I went to see him at home, and what used to happen was that I'd ask a question, and his wife I kind of by default, he was a fairly taciturn sort of chap. Was my first impression of him, a man of very, very few words. And his wife used to, wasn't that she talked for him, but he'd say what he had to say, and then there was, you'd kind of think, I'm sure there's more than that, and she would come in and smooth things over and talk a lot. And I remember saying to her, I feel as if there's a lot more that he could say. She said, well, what we agreed was that she'd stay in the kitchen.
Mm.
And she'd go out to make a cup of coffee and just stay there for much longer than she normally did, to just see what happened. And I think, I mean, just it transformed the whole situation, because she wasn't there for him to kind of lean on, metaphorically. And I was waiting for him to say something. I didn't fill the gaps. He just blossomed. He opened out and he talked and he talked.
Wow.
And I remember as I left what was a very long session, unusually for that man, she came to me and she had tears in her eyes at the door. And she said, "I didn't know you could say that much."
Mm.
Well, you know, so listening is really, really important, and helping family members to allow listening to happen is also really important. That's all part of it.
So do you find yourself almost working with families more than the client? And probably not more, but but it's the whole package as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because the people that person is living with, it's got to be a team approach. You kind of have to find a way, and very often family members will have different views between themselves and with the person concerned as to what ought to be happening, what that person ought to be doing. Of course, that's how families are.
Yeah.
So it's about weaving your way through all of that, and kind of trying to help them all to make it work rather than pulling apart.